So here we are in the ball bouncing animation project file. So if you're following along, make sure to open that project file. We're going to start by applying the basics that we've learned to this ball bounce. So here we have our dope sheet, here we have our timeline, here we have our camera view, here we have our render settings, and then here we have the ball. I'm viewing it in the front view here. So what we're going to do is animate this character bouncing. We're also going to talk about squash and stretch in this video. So squash and stretch is one of the 12 principles of animation. They're invented by the Disney animators way back when they first began animating, and they've long since been studied. This course will cover squash and stretch, and it will also cover secondary motion. If you'd like to learn all 12 principles of animation, I've included a link in the resources. So squash and stretch basically says that we will squash and stretch portions of our character to exaggerate the motion and to communicate character and motion through our in-between frames. So in this case, we'll make the ball squish when it hits the ground, and then when it launches up, we'll make it stretch to add more character. So let's go ahead and first focus on blocking out our character. But first, we need to actually go ahead and turn on auto keying and set up a keying set. So let's go ahead, turn on auto keying. Let's come over here to keying, grab this list here and click location and scale because we only plan to use location and scale. We'll go to the drop down menu and we'll make sure only active keying set is turned on. Now what we need to do is insert some keyframes. So we want this to loop as an animation. So let's go ahead, let's insert a keyframe on frame 28. So grab your ball and press I, and you'll see that it inserts keyframes there. Let's go ahead up here to 1, let's press I, and that'll insert keyframes there. Then we can come over here to 14 and insert a keyframe there. So now we kind of have 3 keyframes that we can work with. So let's go ahead on 28. Let's grab the move tool. Then let's grab this little blue arrow and we're going to move our character up. So let's make them bounce pretty high. So I'm going to move them up to there. Then what we'll see if we play our animation is that it stays still and then snaps up. And that's because these 2 keyframes have no change, so it's not going to change in between them, but then we have a change there. And we want this to loop. So one thing we can actually do is click here at the top of our summary, which will duplicate all the keyframes there, or grab all the keyframes there, and then if we hit Shift D, we can duplicate those keyframes and take them over until they cover that first keyframe. And now that same data will be there, and we'll actually have kind of a bouncing animation. So let's go ahead and play there. So this is part of the blocking phase, and what we're doing is trying to figure out where the character is going to be in the scene. So we know we want our character to go that high, and we know them to land on this kind of red line here as a ground plane. So that's kind of blocking out our character's motion there. So next we're going to move forward on doing some keyframe poses. So we want to introduce squash and stretch. So when they hit the ground, we want them to squish, and when they go up in the air, we want them to stretch. So let's go ahead and first we'll add some squash. So on frame 14, we're going to grab this scale tool here, and we're going to grab this blue icon here, and we're going to squish that down. But you see that doesn't look realistic because we have to think about our character's volume, and we just got rid of a lot of our character's volume. So what we can do is actually go to top view. So I'm going to click this little Z here. And what we can do is drag out on the Y a bit, and we can drag out on the X a bit. Then we can click this little green dot here and it'll take us back to our front view. And we can see that it looks a lot more realistic. So let's see what that looks like. We can see that it's scaling down our character the whole time, which is not what we want. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to frame 8 here and we're going to press Alt S. And what that's going to do is remove any scaling we have here. So if we press Alt S, you'll see that it pops our character back to its normal scale. If we come up here to frame 20, we'll hit Alt S again. And again, it's put our character back to the normal scale. So let's go ahead and hit play now. We can see that that's starting to look better, but that the easing's still off. The timing's good though, so we can fix the easing in the last phase and really polish off the timing to make that work. So what we'll do here is we'll come to frame 8, and now we're going to introduce stretch. So at this point, we want the ball to begin stretching. So we're going to go ahead and grab this ball, and we'll grab the little blue there, and on frame 8, we're going to bring this up so that it looks like it's stretching, so almost like it's smearing straight up. And then, to save ourselves some time, we can actually grab this keyframe here by box selecting it, duplicate it, and bring it over to 20, and that'll give us the same keyframe there. So we can see that it's starting to look a little bit more natural and like it has some movement. This of course doesn't look great, but we do have the timing down and the blocking down. So now it's time to take a look at how we can adjust the easing to make this feel much more natural. So let's come up here and we're going to go over to the graph editor. And we can see that we have a spaghetti noodle mess of options here. So what we're going to do is twirl this down here and we see we have location and scale. So first things first, let's work on the location at first. So I'm actually going to use the eyeball here to toggle off the scale so that we can focus on the location. We can see that we only have this one graph here with all the motion. So if I grab X, I can see there's no motion. And if I grab Y, I can see there's no motion, because in this case, we're moving up and down on the Z axis. So I'm actually going to grab Y and press delete to get rid of that. And then I'm going to select X and then I'm going to delete that. This gives me one thing to focus on. Now, if you can't really see it in your view and you're zoomed in too far or too close, you can actually box select everything or press A to select everything. And if you press period on your numpad, it'll zoom in, making it a little bit easier. So let's begin editing this to give it a more natural flow. So right now when we're playing, the problem we're having is that it's just bouncing up and down at the same speed, making it look like it's floating. Whereas what we want to do is we want the ball to hit the ground, to hold, and then to pop back up quickly, hang in the air to lose its momentum, and then to slowly drop down before gaining momentum and smashing into the ground again. So what this does on the graph editor, it shows us the speed from one keyframe to the next. And right now we can see that's pretty much the same speed throughout. It slows down a tiny bit here and pops right back up at the same speed. So what we'd want that to look like more is more like this, where it's going to hit the ground and hold. So what we're going to do is come up here to bounding box, change this to individual centers, and first let's affect how it holds in the air. So with individual centers on, it will scale at each one independently. So if I grab these, you can see that it'll scale at those independently. If it's on bounding box and I scale, we'll see that it just kind of moves those out and get bigger. So that's the difference there. Turn it on to individual centers, and what we're going to do is press S, then X, and then that'll allow us to scale this way. We're just going to scale that up so that those kind of come in. Now, when we hit play, we'll see that it's holding in the air much longer, maybe a little bit too much. So I'm going to release that scale, and you can see now it's got a little bit more of a natural float in the air. Now the scaling's kind of throwing off our perspective, making it difficult to really see how the float, but it'll look a bit better once we adjust the scaling. Now we need to make it look like it's snapping into the ground. So we actually want him to hit the ground almost around here. So if we go ahead and we grab this and we scale it up, we can make it so that he's almost snapped into the ground by frame 10. Now let's go ahead, go back, and hit play. You can see that's starting to look a lot more natural, but we need to adjust the scale for it to really fit. Now that the location's looking natural, let's focus on the scale to really sell the effect. So what we can do is come up here, turn off visibility of Z location, turn on visibility of Z scale, and we can see our scale graph here. And we can see that the scale is kind of just not necessarily matching the timing of the ground. What we want to do is that as it hits the ground, we want it to snap down quickly. So we know that he hits the ground around frame 10 to 11. So it's kind of in between there. So let's come up here to frame 10. Let's grab this on the bottom, this keyframe here, and then let's scale this up until this value almost reaches there. So what that's going to do is make it look that as soon as he hits the ground, it snaps down, slowly squishes, and then begins to pop back up before going out. So right now this still doesn't look super natural because we actually have some unnecessary easing right here where it converts from one to the other, and we're going to get rid of that. So what you would want to do is grab this handle and rotate it, but you can see that that adjusts both sides. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab both of these and we're going to change the handle type. Now it's buried up here in the menus under handle type, and you can go down to vector. And you'll see that now we can grab these handles and move them independently of one another. Unfortunately, we can see it's also screwed up our graph shape. So let's just go ahead and bring that back a bit. So we'll grab that handle and I'm going to use the G key just to move it. You can also just grab and drag it. So we'll move that up a bit. We'll go over here and we'll grab this handle and move this up a bit. And that should already begin looking more natural. Let's again go to frame 10 and make sure that it's not really fully scaled down until then. Now if we play it back, we can see it's already looking a bit more natural. Now I think we can grab both of these handles here. We can scale those up ever so slightly to make this animation a bit snappier. So what it's going to do is hold natural up here and then snap into that stretch a little quicker. We can even scale that up a bit more. Let me click out so you can get a good view of my F-curve here. So now if we play, we can see that it hits the ground, squishes, and then stretches on its snap up and on its drag down. Now here I can see that the squash is actually coming in too soon. So we can go ahead and we can grab this bottom frame and we can scale that in to remedy that a bit. So let's go ahead, hit play, and that feels much more natural. Now it looks great in the front view, but if we come out, we'll see that because we haven't adjusted the other scales yet, that those aren't mashing as naturally. So what we're going to do is come back into front view. We'll grab our ball, and then we're going to turn on the X and Y scale. And we want to just make sure that these match a little bit better. So we can grab both of these here, and we can adjust multiple curves at once. So we're going to hit R. We're going to rotate that there. We can grab these and rotate that there. And it's okay if there's a little bit of movement here. In this case, that might make it look a little bit more natural. Now, if you don't remember and you're having a hard time following along, remember that I'm just grabbing everything and pressing S to scale, and that's how I'm doing that. So let's go ahead and leave the curve right around there and see how that looks. That looks pretty natural. And with that, we have our first ball bounce, and we're ready to dive into a more complicated example with our character.